Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to another video. Now this is going to be a video going through some of the builds I've been playing for Necrolord, specifically as it relates to Warlock. Keep in mind, I mostly play Demo and Destro, so I'll try and mention some Affliction things if they're relevant, but just some of the builds and the setups that I have been playing. I think Necrolord is very well catered to both Demo and Destro. I feel like it's the strongest for Demo, but it's decent for Destro as well. And so I'm going to go over some of the builds that I've been playing. I get this question a lot, just in general in comments and on stream, and I figured I would make this video going through some of the builds and setups that I have found success with, and some talents that kind of pair with them and kind of what I've come up with so far. I tried pre-setting all of these, but it just resets all the conduits every time I click a new tab. But this first Necrolord tab that we're going to talk about here is Plague Divisor. Now, let me preface this with, at the time of making this video, the patch 9.0.5 has not gone through yet, and they're making tentatively some changes to Fleshcraft. This soulbind is very, very contingent on your Fleshcraft. That's the whole way that this specific soulbind is kind of catered to. So at the time of making this video, this is not a soulbind that I use very often, because ultimate form and this volatile solvent soulbind abilities are both kind of weird and aren't really useful in a lot of situations, and so I have not really been using this at all. That being said, once the changes go through to Fleshcraft, I think this is actually going to be a very, very strong option, tentatively, depending on what the changes are, and I'll kind of go over some of the issues. But this is a general kind of demo tree that I have set up. Usually I'll run something like this in Fatal Decimation. I'm going to keep these here and run Ultimate Form. Now, a couple of things worth mentioning when we're talking about just the general kind of layout of conduits and stuff like that. Potency conduits, most all my demo builds, I run Fel Commando, as it's arguably our best conduit for basically all situations. It's just very, 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 very good. Very, very useful. One thing worth mentioning is this Ooze frictionless coating is a very powerful kind of like secondary trait, whatever you want to call these little diddly daps. This procs a lot. It's only got a 30-second internal cooldown, and it's 15% of your health. As you guys probably are aware, Warlocks have a 10% stamina boost as like a passive trait that we have. So generally speaking, we have pretty large health pools by comparison to, you know, equally eye level people, and you get a lot of value out of this. There's plenty of times where I'll look at the healing done, and this will be 15 or 20k of my healing done to myself, this passive right here. So arguably this passive is more effective than either of these, you know, soulbind abilities. But this is a very, very good ability, so it's worth noting. A lot of times if I'm having issues with actual survivability, I will run this tree, specifically because of how strong this is and the ability to run, you know, double endurance if we want to. So endurance, all these conduits, keep in mind, you can kind of swap out if you don't like these. You'll see down here the second potency that I have been running is Fatal Decimation. This to me feels the most impactful from like a burst kill potential perspective. You can definitely be running things like Born of Blood. That's a very common one that people generally like. I don't think Carnivorous Stalkers is a high enough proc chance to really be running in most kind of PvP situations. It's just a little bit too RNG for me. And then the other option is the Tyrant Soul conduit, and this can be good as well. I just don't find this to be very reliable from a DPS perspective either, but maybe you can make some use of it in certain situations. Keep in mind, a lot of the PvP I've been doing is RBGs, so that's kind of more the perspective that I'm coming from. Now, the finesse conduits and the endurance conduits, this is actually very strong for Demo, the Drain Life one, because you use Drain Life a lot. Helps a lot with your just general survivability. I actually do like this a little bit more than I like the Resolute Barrier. Resolute Barrier is good, but you don't really feel it in a lot of situations. It's very rare that you're just kind of casting it on cooldown, if that makes sense. You're usually using this to like mirror a big offensive go, so, you know, from the other team, and so this is kind of like hit or miss. Sometimes it's valuable, but it's a little bit weird with the way the cooldown is reduced, and it's not very significant as far as how many seconds it actually takes off your cooldown. But Accrued Vitality is very strong. I haven't had as many issues as of late as I've gotten better gear, higher verse, and the buff that they gave our pets as far as their survivability. Haven't had as many issues where I've needed to resummon my minion as much, so this is not as necessary as it was a couple weeks ago, but still, if you're having issues with your pet dying or you want the flexibility to be summoning your pet more, this is obviously very, very strong. Now, Ultimate Form is really worth talking about here because I thought at first glance this was going to be very good. And it turns out it's not. Reason being is that Fleshcraft is a shadow spell, and when you cast this, while it makes you immune to CCs like stun, hammer justice, kidney shot, things like that, it is kickable. So any class that has a kick, as soon as you start channeling this, can just go ahead and kick you. So what happens is you end up holding your Fleshcraft for, instead of having this shield and using it like a preemptive shield that you can cast, you know, in between fights or whatever, you are holding it to use it as like a defensive to negate some kind of CC potentially, but then you're not actually able to negate the CC if anyone around you has a kick. So it's very weird. This should, and I would assume, and I'm hoping that in the patch that they change this should make Fleshcraft uninterruptible. If they make that change, this will be much more valuable. That's the only issue I have with this, because it's definitely not worth using Unending Resolve, and channeling this during Unending Resolve is just kind of a waste of 2 big cooldowns. It feels better just to run a different soulbind and use Fleshcraft as like a preemptive shield and use it, you know, before you get into combat, and have just a big shield on you before you fight people. That seems more strong in virtually every situation than the value you gain from this, because you get kicked on this all the time. So that's kind of just my 2 cents going into it. If they change this and this becomes a situation where Fleshcraft is uninterruptible and you can reliably use this to avoid CCs and polys and clones and fears and things like that, then that would be great. But right now, if you're like against a mage, you start casting this to avoid a poly, he stops casting and kicks you, and now you're locked on shadow. So for specifically us as warlocks, this is not a very good soulbind in most situations. There might be some weird niche cases, but I don't run this a lot because of how disappointing the ultimate form ability was. Now let's go on to Emeni. Emeni here is like the setup that I'll run. You guys have seen sometimes, if you caught any of the streams, I've run this kind of bursty demon bolt build. And for that, I do run Emeni. Now, let me see here. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. And now we can do any, you could really do any of these bottom ones. None of these are actually too significant, but the talent build that I've been running with this setup is something like this. I'll kind of talk through these in a second once I finish this. And then we run Pleasure Through Pain and whatever, you know, basically call Dreadstalkers and call Fell Hunter. But this setup that we're doing is basically very heavily dependent on basically casting Dreadstalkers, casting Power Siphon with Amps Up, and, you know, getting 2 procs of the Power Siphon or the Demonic Core procs, and then basically fearing or coiling into a Decimating Bolt, double Demon Bolt. That's kind of what you're trying to do here. So with that setup, Emeni actually works very well, because for us, it gives an intellect buff after casting Decimating Bolt for only 7.5 seconds. 7.5 seconds is not long enough in most situations to really utilize the int bonus very well. But for this setup and this build, because we're basically casting Decimating Bolt and then you have 2 instant cast follow-ups that are going to be hitting really hard, it's pretty reliable and consistent to be able to get this off, and so it actually synergizes very well, and you can kind of reliably keep rinsing and repeating this kind of burst setup. Now, when we're talking about potency conduits, if you want to go any of these setups, I would say Born of Blood is the best with this build, as your whole goal is to be casting as many demon bolts as possible, and Born of Blood will help you do that. This Gristled Toes, the bottom soulbind here, is negligible. It's some movement speed that's going to happen based on how many people are around you, so it's whatever. Nothing too exciting. One thing that is worth mentioning though is that if you're doing this setup and maybe you're having issues with surviving, you know, against melee comps, I haven't gotten to test this out yet. It just came out today, but this Sulfuric Emission is like an AoE fear when you get brought below 20% health. This is something that would be specifically good against melee cleaves, potentially I would think in arena. I don't think this would be very valuable in RBGs, as it's pretty likely that there's also range DPS attacking you, so I'm not sure how often this fear would save your life or not, but again, it might end up being something that you want to run sometimes. But yeah, this is the setup that I've been running in Emeni, and I've been keeping all of these conduits locked in as I keep running out of my little soulbind energies or whatever they're called. But yeah, because Decimating Bolt, Demon Bolt, and you can actually utilize the lead by example soulbind pretty well with that build and that setup. Now on to Bonesmith. Bonesmith was the kind of the best surprise of Necrolord and seems to be the strongest when we're talking about at least, you know, RBG settings and like battleground settings in general. Main reason being is Forgeborn Reveries is very, very good. This not only is giving you passive armor and intellect, which is great because it's just consistency and just good value all the time, but upon death, you basically live for an extra 10 seconds and you're going to do reduced damage or healing during this phase. However, all of your utility is still going to be the same. So you can cast Fear, you can throw out a bunch of your curses. If you're playing Affliction, you could be casting a bunch of corruptions and getting your little slow thing on everyone. You can still use all of your utility spells, right? You can Shadow Fury, you can Chaos Bolt, you can do everything in this form. While you're doing reduced damage, you still have all the utility. So I have had multiple games where this has been the difference of spinning a flag long enough for my team to follow up, or getting the final kill via like a Chaos Bolt on a, you know, a orb carrier in Temple. There's a lot of actual practical value you get from this in a lot of situations when we're talking about, you know, RBGs and battlegrounds in general. In arenas, I don't know that it would have the same value, right, because of the way arena works, but it's still very good nonetheless. Even if you don't die, the 3% int is very strong. Like I have around 1700 int. I'm getting like 50 int passive from this buff 100% of the time. Like it's just always on. So the passive int you get from this is just very significant. And again, just kind of from a consistency perspective. Now this is actually the tree that I play for Destro. And we do this. We do this. Yeah, we could do something like that. And we'll go Diabolic. And then here I'll go Fell Commando. Now, the reason I have these conduits set up specifically like this is basically this setup right here that we have is what I will run for Destro. Reason being is the Shade of Terror conduit is very, very strong for Destro as you use your Fear consistently throughout, you know, actually fighting someone as like a pseudo stun in between your casts. So this Shade of Terror is arguably the best for Affliction and for Destro just because of the way your kits work. I don't have any value for this when I'm playing Demo unless I'm trying to prevent my allies from breaking Fears, because I'm not casting Fear generally the same way for Demo as I am for Destro, as this forces all of your minions to stop attacking the target. So a lot of times you're not casting Fear on your kill target as Demo in a lot of situations. So for that reason, I have this paired with the Destro setup. Now, when we're talking about the double endurance conduits, I have health, the accrued vitality up here, because this is something that's specifically valuable for Demonology in my opinion, and it's not a spell that I cast very often when I'm playing Destro. So for that reason, I don't care about having it when I'm playing Destro at all, but I do want it when I'm playing Demo. And when we talk about the lower soul binds, the Morrow Gemstone Soulbind, which is after 10 consecutive or 10 critical strikes, you get a buff for 10 seconds, giving you 18% crit. This is decent for PvE potentially for Demo, but I don't find it very valuable in PvP because of how Demo works. It's just pretty unreliable in being able to actually get a lot of value out of this. However, for Destro and the combination that we have with Chaos Bolt scaling with crit, this is actually very good for Destro. It's not amazing where you would, I think it's like a necessity, but it's very strong because whenever this procs, if you can cast a Chaos Bolt in that 10-second window, it's going to hit 18% harder. And our Chaos Bolts already hit pretty hard, and then you run Madness Legendary, then you use Dark Soul Misery. You stack all those things on top of each other, and it's very, very, very strong. This is the setup I've been playing in RBGs, and you surprisingly get a lot of kills when this procs. It's very noticeable how impactful it is from just a straight DPS perspective. You're not going to be able to utilize it well all the time, but when you can, it's very, very good, and all the rest of these are kind of whatever. Now, what I end up having set up here is I have... How do I change the little route? Why isn't it letting me change this? That's kind of annoying. It doesn't let me change the path. But basically what I would do is if I wanted to play RBGs and I wanted to run Forgeborn Reveries for Demo, then I have this set up and I don't have to swap my conduits around, right? So we'd go down this side here and we'd get the health funnel. Serrated Spalders Nothing too crazy about serrated spalders, but it does give you a little bit of passive damage. And a lot of times when I've tested this, I'm getting around like 2% of my damage done ends up being from this. It's just kind of like a reflect damage that you get when people attack you. It does also proc on people if they cleave you. So like if a warrior's near you and blade storms and hits you, they'll get this debuff. So it actually has a good amount of uptime, but it's relatively low damage. But again, it's not bad. I would say it's better than this, the reducing fleshcraft cooldown. But anyway, kind of whatever. But we'll go down this side, get health funnel, and then we come down here, and then I grab Fell Commando, and then we get Gore Stompers. Now, Gore Stompers is pretty cool and unique. However, it's just kind of a little bit random, and it has the 1 minute internal cooldown, so it's kind of hard to like reliably use this, at least in like battleground situations, because it just kind of randomly procs, and then it's on cooldown the next time someone's low. But either way, it's decent, it's nice to have, but nothing really too exciting or miraculous to talk about here. And Ravenous Pendant, I don't think is something that you're going to get enough consistent value in PvP to really even talk about. But so yeah, so that's the main thing here. Again, we're going this setup that's highlighted here for our Destro setup, and then this is kind of my go-to Demonology build. Because again, mostly because Forgeborn Reveries is just very, very, very strong. So those are kind of the three setups that I have right now with my soulbinds. I definitely think Bonesmith is the go-to and the strongest, the one that feels the most impactful currently. The other thing I really like about this setup is that none of the abilities are changing how our fleshcraft works, and we can kind of just use this as a preemptive shield before we start any of these engages, or if you're base sitting and all this stuff. And having an extra 20% health when our health pools are, you know, in 45,000 health pool when you're like full geared is pretty significant. And you know, it's an extra 8,000 or 9,000 health that people have to eat through before they can actually kill you. Now, the one other thing that I was going to mention here is the how do I switch this to Destro? The build that I've been playing for Destro is this setup. I'm lagging a little bit. Is this setup here. Now, I talked about this briefly, but this build actually seems to be pairing very well with this soulbind setup. Main reason being is if you are able to time everything around getting this proc, you can basically Dark Soul Misery and then double Chaos Bolt, can flag, and then Shadow Burn. All of that's amplified. Like Shadow Burn basically will have like, you know, close to 100% chance to crit if you have all of that up and the target's below 20% health. Very, very good. The other thing that's really noticeable is that when the Forgeborn Reverie procs, when you die for 10 seconds, like I said, you can cast all of your abilities. So if you have Dark Soul up already or something like that and you get killed, your Chaos Bolts will still hit for like between 5 and 10k depending on how much stuff you have procced at a given time. So they still hit pretty hard. There's been multiple times where I have gotten someone, you know, 3 people have jumped on me and one person was really low. They killed me, they thought I was dead, and then I Chaos Bolted the low target from the Forgeborn Reveries proc and killed them basically while I was dead. So that happens more often than you would actually think. The other thing that's worth mentioning is there's a lot of times maybe you die and you have 3 or 4 or 5 shards up, and you can dump your Shadowburn procs during that Forgeborn Reverie setup as well. And so there's just a lot of kind of cohesion between all of that going on that I've found to be really strong and have a lot of, you know, a lot of use cases and situations where you're actually able to utilize the procs and all that kind of stuff. And it just feels really good. It all goes together very well. So anyway, those are the kind of builds and the setups that I've been running. Hopefully you guys find that helpful. Let me know, like always, if you have any questions or anything that I left out or maybe didn't mention. I do think right now, when I'm talking about an RBG perspective, to me so far, the strongest that I've felt is with this Bonesmith setup. And again, with this talent build, even though I love Demo, I'm partial to Demo, I feel like the burst that's currently with this combination is absolutely nuts. So I plan on posting some more videos on that, but any of you guys interested in going changing over to Necro or playing Necro, hopefully this gives you a little bit of clarity on the soul binds and kind of how I've been playing them. One last thing to mention is about Decimating Bolt. Decimating Bolt for Demonology is very, very good. I use Decimating Bolt for Demo all the time. It's like a big part of my rotation. I really prioritize it because of the way it works with Demon Bolt and just how it feels from like a demo rotation perspective. I don't use it very often for destruction, but it's worth mentioning when I cast Decimating Bolt, my incinerates can be critting for like 8, 9, 10k. So your incinerates will hit very hard. It's a little bit wonkier to cast this for Destro because a lot of your setup is really like on immolates, incinerates, and then chaos bolts, and decimating bolt does not generate any shards, so that feels kind of bad. If it did generate a shard when you casted it, because it's such a long cast time, I think I would use it a lot more. But the fact that it generates no shards, and when you're playing Destro, you're kind of shard starved, much more so than you are for Demo, and so for that reason, it's not a huge benefit for destruction. Very, very, very good for Demo. And I don't think it's very good for Affliction either, kind of for the same reason I don't think it's very good for Destro. But it is something worth mentioning, and you do have it in your toolkit to utilize and give you an alternative source of damage via Decimating Bolt and a few Incinerates rather than trying to rely solely on Chaos Bolt damage. So just wanted to mention that as well. All right, guys, I don't want to make this video too long. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, by all means, please leave them down below, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya.